Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be our welcome for the next hour. We have with us, by popular demand, which I'm very much receptive to, Dave Smith, 1/3 Legion of Skanks, host of Part of the Problem, comrade in arms. Dave, it is great to have you back on the show as part of our ongoing crossover event. One of the best things to happen as a result of COVID.
Yes, up there, definitely top 5.
Wait, can we think of any silver linings about COVID?
Well, the obvious one, public schools.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big one. I tweeted earlier today something like where I was like, conservatives are now fighting for the two things they hold most dear: public school and women's sports.
What about government spending?
Well, yeah, that's not checks. Even a fight. That's not even a fight. That's just right, like yes. We've all agreed to just outcompete who's the bigger spender. But yeah, I think there's, we took a year off from, indoctrination of children, although it's not great because, it's like there's no other system in place for kids to socialize. So they were, there are bad effects to kids being stuck in their homes, but that's pretty good. And then, like we always say, the right wingers getting woke about the cops. That's pretty good.
I was on Jesse Kelly's show this morning. I know you guys have talked recently, which I'm very happy about. Jesse is just terrific. It's really funny. There was someone from, I think like the Lincoln Project or the Bulwark, one of those outfits. And Jesse was talking about how we need to have national separation, right? Which I've been advocating, of course, and obviously you're receptive to as well. And the guy did a screen cap. They always do the screen cap because they don't want to engage with you. But also, in all fairness, sometimes I do it because Twitter's awful. And sometimes when you quote tweet, it crops the tweet or something like that. So it's really annoying. And he's like, he said the quiet part out loud, as if Jesse had slipped about a position that he's been advocating for now several years. It was also really funny because this morning he's like, oh, I don't know if you've heard of my position on having a national divorce. I'm like, yeah, I was the one who started this. Receipts, April 2015 or whatever it was. You could go look at it. He's like, oh, okay. Where was I going with this? I don't remember. But what I do want to where was I? Why did I bring up Jesse? Well, we'll take it out in post. What I
love is just where sometimes.
Oh no, I know where it was. Yeah, sorry. It was the point I was making was even under FDR, with the Great Depression, which she obviously prolonged to some extent, there wasn't talk of giving literally everyone checks.
Yeah.
Even at that point where I could really wrap my head around, look, was it 25% unemployment? There's no possibility this is going to get better. Everything has grinded to a halt. It's just year after year, and especially minority populations, you're completely screwed. There wasn't even food to go around. I could wrap my head around, all right, everyone's getting a check. You could spend it for food, but no. And now they're just doing it yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, but the main reason why that wasn't a possibility is monetary policy. I mean, it just wasn't an option at the time to print a bunch of zeros on a computer and send all these checks out to everyone. They were still at such a primitive form that FDR had to round up the gold. Literally, the government just didn't have the power to even consider sending checks out to everybody. They weren't that wealthy.
Wait a minute. So this ended with what, Nixon, when he took us off the gold window?
Well, yes, after the Bretton Woods agreement collapsed, yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize even at that time I knew FDR. For those who don't know, we're going to get a little wonky here. FDR, this is there's so many things that we're not taught in school that when you tell people this, they think, okay, this is propaganda or some twist or some fever dream. And it's the kind of thing that no historian disagrees with, but it's so different from what you're taught in school. Someone has to be okay, something's not adding up. For example, that Lincoln had no explicitly said this is not about freeing the slaves. He just said it all the time. This is not in dispute. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in states that were rebelling. It did not free them in northern states that had slavery. This is not in dispute. But when you tell people this, they're like, wait, FDR made it illegal for people to own gold.
Yeah, that's right.
And when you tell that to people, they're like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? And they're like, no, it's exactly what it sounds like. He made it against the law to own gold, number one. Number two, he broke every single contract in America unilaterally because the contract said, Dave, I'm going to paint your house and you have to pay me back in $500 or the equivalent amount in gold. Because in case there's hyperinflation, like, yeah, I don't want the cash, I want the gold. And FDR goes, yeah, none of those clauses in these voluntary contracts are enforceable. So too bad.
Dude, I love what's her name? The woman, I'm blanking on her name, who wrote the book
Ayn
on
Rand?
Lincoln. No, not Ayn Rand. I remember her name.
Lorenzo?
No, no, although he is one handsome woman. But the one, she wrote the book that got turned into the movie. She's like the mainstream historian.
Okay. Doris Kearns Goodwin?
Yes, okay. I think that's right. And so her thing in the book, she covers how after the war, Lincoln opposed the amendment to end slavery. And it's unbelievable how they'll work with, like historical facts that just shatter their entire narrative. And like, so how do you work with that? The fact that he was opposed to the abolition of slavery after the war. And she writes this whole thing about how it was a brilliant political move because he knew he had to keep the conservatives on board with him and then move toward ultimately abolishing slavery. Like, it's unbelievable what the hoops they will jump through psychologically to keep the narrative together. It's unbelievable.
And let's even look at it from Lincoln's perspective. If you have two horrible choices, right? These people always pretend, I don't want to say these people, historians, but like it's such a common thing in the corporate media that you never have to make bad choices. It's always good people doing good things or bad people doing bad things. Which are you going to do? If you have a choice as President Lincoln to have union with slavery, we continue as we've been going on as a successful country, successful, however you want to define it, for 7 years ago, whatever it was, or I'm going to abolish slavery and basically alienate half the country in perpetuity. They're not going to feel part of America. These are not good choices for him to have. So you can easily, I'm sure he sat down with his, what you call team of rivals, because her book, if we're thinking the same person, she talked about all the people who contested Lincoln for the Republican nomination in 1860. He later, very smartly, I agree with her, brought into his cabinet so it would really be the best. They sat down and they hashed this out. They had to hash this out. They're at war. War is very expensive. I'm sure he wasn't totally happy at all the young men being killed and all the rape and all the tragedy. And he's like, all right, these are our choices. And these choices both suck. But historically, having Lincoln be a complex figure dealing with complex issues also means, well, the South has to do some kind of complex calculus. And if there's any ambiguity there, then you're defending slavery and blah, 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 blah. And then maybe war isn't always the right answer. And that's a real, it's like in the cartoons where there's a sweater and there's a thread and you start pulling the thread and then the person's naked and you're holding the sweater. That's basically what happens with this whole. And the thing is, again, historians aren't in dispute over these facts. Now, her interpretation might be wonky, but she's not denying this fact.
Right. Yeah, well, they can't, but they will quite often just leave certain facts out because they don't, fit with the narrative. I've always loved like the interesting kind of like revisionist history, which, by the way, I think is so hilariously Orwellian that the term revisionist history is like a pejorative. It's associated with like Holocaust denial or something like that. Like, even though the actual Holocaust like official story is revisionist history too, like that it wasn't like in the sense that this wasn't the story.
Oh, correct.
In 1946, like this was a story developed later. But it's just like, yeah, well, revisionist history. I mean, what does it mean to not support revisionist history? Like, we're just supposed to take the first draft and never examine, like just whatever powerful people say at the time, that's what happened.
Or
never look back at it.
Not only that, it's that as if we're not going to learn more things as history passes and uncover, especially for ancient times or even recent times. A lot of it's going to be filtered through corporate interests or political interests or whoever's in power at the time. And then later it's like, wait a minute, they had to keep, you don't have to even be malevolent about it. It could be like, look, they had to keep this information secret at the time because it would expose intelligence agents in the field. And we knew things we weren't supposed to know and blah, blah, blah. Like that makes perfect sense. Now that they're dead, we can talk about this.
But even just like things that people knew that just get that were public information that everyone was living through that just get buried as we're telling the story later. So like, I think you and Tom on one of your episodes of the animated show, we're talking about, like FDR brought us out of the Great Depression. And then you just look at like the unemployment rate in 1939. And you're like, whatever, it was like 20% or something like that. So you're like, well, just that right there. This completely destroys the narrative.
Right.
That these New Deal programs put in 32 and 33, like saved the economy. If 8 years later, you still have double-digit unemployment, then obviously this isn't what happened. But that all kind of gets wiped away. And then it's just like, well, New Deal and depression's over eventually. So.
What else I find interesting isn't even things that are typically political. Like I've done some reading on this because the impression we have nowadays is that Americans didn't know FDR was in a wheelchair. And I'm like, what did they know? And like the argument is that the press conspired to keep this secret, but it's not entirely. And again, I could be incorrect here, but I just did some cursory reading on this. It's not entirely clear that that's true. Like they 100% knew he had polio. Polio was not an uncommon condition.
Right.
They knew he had leg braces. So maybe they didn't know he was like full blown wheelchair, but they certainly knew he had difficulty getting around. So it's kind of interesting because if that's the kind of thing where I'm sure wasn't discussed much at the time, just out of respect. And if someone has Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court, she has diabetes. We don't really talk about it because it's like, well, who cares one way or another?
Right.
Unless she's not recusing herself in the lawsuit against Cadbury. But with FDR, it's like he's not like running, and it's not an issue one way or another. He's not going to be on the front lines as commander in chief. So it's kind of interesting what has fallen away and what is common parlance at the time. That speaks to your point. It's like you have to read between the lines, even something that's pretty unambiguous in terms of facts, or in terms of political interests. It's like it's hard to know what people knew.
You see it already, right? Like, which is one of the interesting things about watching like the younger generations is that I'll see them now talking about like the 90s or something. And I'm like, no, that's not how it was. But that's like, I was there. I remember, there's this perception from a lot of young people today, and they really don't know a lot about history and everything, which is very much in the progressive worldview, is that everything previous to the progressive awakening was awfulness. Like, you don't need to know anything about pre-1965. Racist. That's what you need to know. Yeah. That's history. History is racist. And then civil rights, and then still racist. And so a lot of people would like say when the Me Too movement first like kicked off, people would be talking about like Bill Clinton, would come up. Well, all you guys covered for Bill Clinton. And there's kind of like these young progressives who are like, that was the before time. Okay, that was like before we were aware of this shit. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. Yeah. We knew rape was bad in the 90s. It's not like in the 90s people were just like, yeah, whatever. I mean, there were national campaigns against sexual harassment led by Bill Clinton's White House. Like, it's not like people weren't aware. This is like the Cuomo defense. Oh, yeah, I made these jokes, but like I didn't even really realize the governor shouldn't be making sexual jokes with his staff. Like, yeah, you did. We all know this.
It was either 1990 or 1992 where it was called by the media the year of the woman, because there were a record number of women who had been elected to Congress.
Right.
And this was a big rallying call. And again, we had our first feminist, like real, like post, feminist revolution feminist as first lady. This was going to be the chance to, really implement feminism, and not in a more old, by now it would be called an old school version of feminist, women in the workplace, so on and so forth. And 92 it was. And when this Lewinsky stuff came, and one of the big issues that they fought for is sexual harassment laws, in the sense of it's not voluntary, they would say. and with good reason, if the CEO is pressuring his secretary to sleep with him. They were saying there is a power differential. It's not the same as if they're on a date where sure there's a power differential. He's like, she has pressure for her work. And this was a huge issue at that time. 94 happens. The Republicans take over Congress for the first time in 40 years. Pat Schroeder, who was a congresswoman from Colorado, I'm 99% sure, was furious. She was beyond angry. She was furious. And she said, the year of the woman is over. And I remember Rush Limbaugh playing that clip on his show and going, yes, it was such a weird reaction. But the point is, then this Lewinsky stuff broke and all the feminists immediately went back to like just years ago, like, well, she's an adult, you know, she can do whatever she wants. And there were two feminists, like two hardcore feminists who were actually opposite sides, who despised each other, who thought this was complete crap. Camille Paglia, my great idol, because she had an article called No Law in the Arena about like, you're a woman in the office, you got to play by the rules. Sexual harassment laws are nonsense because a woman can also use her wiles to get ahead. So it goes both ways. If you want equality, you can't have these protections. And Andrea Dworkin, who was this, like, she was like 300 pounds, literally crazy person who said pornography should be illegal because it's basically all about women being put into meat grinders. I'm like, I'm not a big porn fan, never seen that. But she was like, you're telling me that the power differential between a CEO and a secretary is a problem. And I agree with you. These secretaries need to be protected, but a president and an intern is not? Is there literally any possible bigger power differential in an office between the most powerful man on earth and someone who's not even getting paid?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, and you see, I mean, it's oftentimes these things get revealed for the power
Let me just say
play.
one more thing. Let me just say one more thing. This is what else has been forgotten from the history books. He denied it when it came out. He said, I did not. And he also made a point, I didn't have any inappropriate contact with her. It wasn't just because one of his people, I think it was Donna Shalala, asked him in a cabinet meeting, Mr. President, sex doesn't always mean, I'm sorry I have to ask you this, sex doesn't always mean sex. Did you have inappropriate contact with this woman? And he goes, no, nothing of the kind. And the argument was, okay, if this was revealed, he'd have to resign because, you know, Gary Hart had just had an affair and was running for the nomination. I think it was 88. He got harpooned and he came out. It was proven because of the dress. And everyone's like, okay, he's going to have to resign now. And he's like, I'm not resigning. And everyone looked around because they didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. But you see how much of this stuff is just a naked power play.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like watching it, I'm sure for a lot of people, it was pretty revealing to watch the Me Too movement just totally sweep the country. I mean, it's funny because like COVID's been such a thing that it's wiped out from people's memories, like how big a thing the Me Too movement was, how big the Russia collusion story was, you know, but for the Me Too movement to take over the way it did, and then for the Tara Reade story to just be like, we're just going to brush that under the rug. It's like, yeah, here's this woman very credibly accusing Joe Biden of not an inappropriate joke or making her feel uncomfortable, but like a vicious sexual assault. And that's just, we're just gonna forget that and move on because, you know, we've really got to get Trump out. And you realize so much of this stuff, so much of politics is just about power, you know?
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Want to tell you about one of my favorite sponsors that's near and dear to a certain part of my body. That's Sheath Underwear. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, get 20% off your order. SHEATH underwear.com. It's the boxers that support you. What is Sheath different from all the other boxers? Not only is it the most comfortable you're ever going to wear, because they have this moisture wicking technology. It's stretchy. They feel super soft, but they have a dual pouch technology. One part for one part of your boy parts, another part for your other part of your boy parts. First time you try it, you're like, what is this? And then you'd be like, this is how underwear should feel. They also have a girl line. Bridget Fetisi was just wearing those. I don't know what that's about. I don't know what's going in where. All I know is I wear Sheath every day, and so should you, because they'll make you feel like a real man. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you get 20% off your order. They also support Lewis, with whatever he's doing. Probably some sort of burglary, if I had to guess. Let's get back to the show. Yeah. Speaking of politics, I know this is the inside baseball question that everyone wanted me to talk to you about. Did you watch that episode I did with Justin Amash?
I did indeed. Okay. I enjoyed it very much.
I was very taken aback, or maybe it's just my job having been a co-author of books or as a host where I feel like my job, I'm the kind of interviewer, I don't want to make people uncomfortable or push them too far. I want it to be a conversation. I'm not a journalist or an interrogation. I thought he came off great. He really made me like him a lot more, but the feedback was almost universally hostile and negative. And I was very surprised at that. I thought he answered the questions fairly, and I thought he was open about how Washington works in many ways. So I'm just curious to hear your impressions.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I found Justin to be super likable on your show, and I thought it was cool that he did it. And there were a few things he said that I thought like, oh wow, that's a really good point, and I haven't thought about things that way. But I understand why your audience was frustrated with him.
Okay, well, I mean, why do you think that's the case?
I think that, okay, so me and you have a different, we're coming from a different school of thought than Justin Amash is. And yes, we look at the power structure and the political class and the cathedral in a very different way than he does. And I think part of this is personality driven. There are people who just, and this is how he came off to me, just are very nice, likable people who aren't fighters in the same way that guys like me and you are, who are much more comfortable as flamethrowers. By the Andrew Heaton, me and you are going to do his show, I believe, tomorrow. Yeah, he's one of these guys. He's like a true Midwest nice person, just such a nice person. You ever meet him? He does not want to fight or argue with people. That he's very smart. He's a very good libertarian, really funny guy, but he doesn't like to be in battle mode like that. And so I think that Justin Amash's worldview is something like, I think this system is corrupt. I think it does a lot of damage to a lot of people, but I'm never going to attribute to malice, no pun intended, what I can attribute to, ignorance, or, like some people might be getting it wrong, and we just have honest disagreements about how the system should work and things like that. Whereas my outlook on the world is more like, these are blood-soaked monsters. Now, neither one of those is 100% correct. There are both of those worldviews will not always apply accurately to the situation. But I think that Justin Amash's worldview gives it, so like at its worst, my worldview paints passively corrupt or ignorant people as malicious. Yeah. But at its worst, Justin Amash's worldview gives a pass to blood-soaked monsters. And I think that frustrates people. But
to something he said, which I found thought-provoking, and I hate that term is used because it usually means I actually have been thinking about this at length. First of all, I think his point wasn't that they're ignorant. I think he kept saying that they just don't care. And that's a very kind of big difference. It's not this kind of idea where if you sat down with them and gave them Henry Hazlitt and Anatomy of the State, that they can kind of come to the realization. It's more like when George H.W. Bush came into the White House, he took National Review, which had been on the desk, I think, at Camp David, threw it in the garbage and said, we don't need this kind of crap anymore. Like, National Review was too heady and intellectual for him. And I think Amash is speaking to that. He said explicitly that these people don't care about policy at all. So I guess it's neither monsters nor ignorant. It's just like automatons.
Here's the problem with that, to me, is that you can't look, if you're saying that the system is corrupt. Yeah. But, oh shit, hold on 1 second. Sorry. Shit.
We could pause it and take it out.
Yeah, can you just pause for 1 second? Yeah, I'm sorry, it's just my mother-in-law.
Of course, dude.
Hey. Oh, I'm recording now. Oh, are you coming over now? Oh, shit. Oh, okay. All right. Bye. Shit, hold on 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Sorry about that. Whole thing.
Okay. So
sorry. Where were we?
We were talking about the thing about them being automatons.
I remember where I was now. So like, it seems to me to be a problem if you're going to say that, look, this system is corrupt and this system destroys people's liberties, but I'm not going to blame any person for being corrupt or destroying people's liberties. There seems to me to be an issue there because the system, wherever it comes from, is only made up of individuals. So in other words, somebody's got to have this guilt on their hands, right? So it's like looking at a forest and saying, the forest is evil, but none of the trees are evil, but it's just made up of trees. So when he's saying that, listen, they don't really care what bill gets passed or doesn't get passed, and they're just kind of going along, it's like, well, someone does, because someone's getting the bills in their hands. Someone's writing these into the bills. And it can't be that no one is responsible. And perhaps it's not true that everyone is responsible, but do you get what I'm saying? Like, there's got to be someone who's setting the agenda.
So let's talk about this, because let's do anatomy of the state and dissect what he was kind of making to be the case. He was saying, and I would bet good money he was being truthful, that you're in these committees, right? You get literal scripts when you're in front of these witnesses and you put on a show that you and I have. I didn't think it was the point of literal scripts. I thought that maybe they were talking points, but at that point it's academic whether someone's good at improv or not. And that it's also very, very top down, that you have the party leadership in the House and the Senate. They put you on whatever committees they want, or they will put you on no committees. And the issue is when you're on these committees, you get invited to these fundraisers so it's basically a system designed to reward good behavior, by which they mean like doing what the lobbyists want, and punish bad behavior. You get marginalized. When push comes to shove, 1 vote out of 435 really isn't a lot.
Yeah.
And he also made the very valid point that how many members of Congress could you and I name? Probably 50 of those 435. Most of these people are not camera hogs. He said it's a good gig. You go in there, you vote Republican or Democrat, you go home, you campaign in a safe district. People respect you. Oh, Congressman. Oh, so nice to meet you. Oh, blah, blah, blah. You feel like a good person because you help a school get opened, or you help someone in a wheelchair get a ramp or something like that, which are not minor things. You should feel good about that if you have the power to do something like that. I mean, whatever. And that's basically the cycle. So it is much more top down to have that codified. I thought that was kind of revelatory.
No, I think it's interesting. And one of the things that I found like particularly interesting about the show was when he mentioned, and I forget, because I listened to it when it first came out. I forget exactly what he said, but he said something about how he was never really that close to the power source.
Right.
Like something about, he's like, look, I mean, I was a congressman, but I wasn't like in with Nancy Pelosi planning the agenda. Like I wasn't like, and that's kind of interesting in itself, that it's like just some congressman doesn't really know what's going on behind the scenes or even know how this bill got presented to them. Right. He just gets to vote on it, But I guess where I would differ with in attitude with Justin Amash is that even as you just described it right there, so if you're saying there are these other congressmen that will kind of play the game in front of the camera or pretend they hate each other, but then they'll just read their lines, they're like, he was kind of the one who wouldn't, right? As he put it, like, well, then you're going to get bumped back because you're not really helping this play. So the other people are just putting on this show to sell something to the American people. I mean, how do you not have utter contempt for that person? Like how it reminded me almost of so Bernie Sanders, and I think this is a major reason why Bernie Sanders didn't win, maybe not the only one, but one of the major ones, is that Bernie Sanders would do this thing where he would never have the courage to just call Biden or Hillary Clinton in 2016 out for being corrupt, but he would kind of beat around the bush, where the only logical conclusion to what he was arguing was that they're corrupt, but never actually call them corrupt. So he would say these things when he was running against Joe Biden, where he was like, look, I like Joe. Joe's my friend. He's a very decent guy. But who's contributing to Joe Biden's campaign? Millionaires and billionaires. And so who do you think Joe Biden is going to be writing laws to benefit? You know, and you're like, well, wait a minute. If what you're saying is true, then you're not saying he's your friend and a very decent guy. You're saying he is a corrupt monster who will sell out the American people, lie to their face, and then sell them out to pay back campaign donations from what. So you almost like, you can't have these two views. Like, it seems very hard for me to be like, I believe in human liberty, and I think that the state violates natural God-given human rights. But also, I'm not going to like say anyone in the state apparatus is a bad guy or anything like that. You know what I mean? It's just like all these people, they got a good gig, and there just seems to be something in those two worldviews that are contradictory to me. Like, if this is true, like, if people, you know, I don't see how you can be like, well, you know, the mafia is an awful organization. It kills people. It tortures people. It destroys these neighborhoods. I have nothing against the individual members of the mafia. I mean, they're just people who have a job. And there's something about that I don't, that's not what our audience likes. So I understand where your audience was frustrated with him about that. And I also just, what I find frustrating, like the thing when, and I get it, because look, he's a really nice guy and he was in Congress and he's playing a different game than we are. But I think I'm sure to a lot of normie blue pill people, when you ask him about the cops and he's like, look, I have nothing against cops. And like, I think a lot of cops are just doing their jobs and blah, 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 and this and that. And I'm sure to a lot of normies, it's like, yeah, that's a nice way to start your statement off. But to me, I'm like, why do I have to start by complimenting my enemies? Like, why is that required by me when it's never given in return? You know, this is like, me and him had a little dust up on Twitter recently. And then I ended up trying to say a lot of nice things about him, because I'm not like, he's not an enemy to me. I look at him as like an ally and like one of the best congressmen who has ever lived. By far one of the best. But, you know, he was like, congratulations to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. When they were sworn in, like congratulating them. And that was my thing, is like, why are we congratulating our enemies? Like, why? And it's not as if like, you know, then when like John Brennan is speaking about libertarians, it's not like he goes, listen, there's a lot of good libertarians who just really want to fight for human liberty, and they have a different philosophy than us about what the role of government should be, but a lot of really good people, really smart, read a lot about economics and history, and he goes, no, you're terrorists. He goes, you're just like the Trump supporters. It's like Trump supporters, right-wing militias, the KKK, and libertarians. You're all the same. So why are we always playing this game where when we're talking about our enemies, we're like, well, let me just tell you, a lot of them are really good people and they do a lot of really good work, and sure, by definition of the job, cops violate natural rights every single day, but I still like a lot of them. And then you ask them what they think of us, they're like, I don't know, ignorance of the law is no excuse, get in the car. Like, it's not. So why do we have to play this game all nice?
Hey guys, want to take a second and talk about Fume, FUM essential.com. Promo code Malice10, you get 10% off your order. This is why Fume is great. I just gave mine to my friend who's been vaping and she's trying to quit. It's not a vape. It's not a cigarette. It's just a hollow piece of Canadian maple. And they have these cores that you stick into the other side. There's a black pepper core, which helps you reduce nicotine cravings. You have a peppermint one for better breathing, lavender for relaxation. You hold it, you kind of smoke it, although there's no smoke, but it replaces that addictive hand-to-mouth action that so many cigarette smokers, so many people who vape have issues breaking, that ritual. And it's natural, it's not addictive, and it looks really cool. It looks like a steampunk vape. Look at the picture, go to FUMessential.com. There's more than half a dozen flavors. You can subscribe for monthly deliveries. And if you use promo code Malice10, you get 10% off your entire order for your health. Let's get back to the show. But that leads to what I thought was the most thought-provoking thing he said. Mm-hmm. And I've been grappling with this for the last 2 weeks. Coming from the Soviet Union and having my chops with North Korea, he made the point repeatedly, which I had not heard expressed before, that having a low trust society is not conducive to a society that has a small state. And that he points to when you have a country or society or nation where people are suspicious of each other, that correlates very heavily with authoritarianism. Now, to some extent, it is very clearly a chicken and egg situation because authoritarian countries get by constantly, because there's no utopia. So every country is going to have things that go wrong, even if it's just the weather or just whatever. And authoritarian countries where the government is providing and taking care of everything has to find a way to excuse this. And the best excuse is either it's them, foreigners, or it's the enemy within. And then you also have the secret police. You don't know who you can trust. You're going to be very suspicious of everybody because the cost benefit of telling someone something that is kind of maybe politically incorrect in the original sense might have severe consequences. So you're going to be extremely guarded, and it kind of builds and feeds off each other. So his point being, if President Trump, and I don't think it's completely one-sided or even predominantly President Trump, if President Trump and the corporate press are causing a situation where Americans are hateful and distrustful of one another, they are naturally going to want a larger state to protect them and their neighborhoods from these other people who do not share their views and values and are trying to destroy them. I thought that was a really interesting approach. What do you think about that?
Well, so I agree with him, and I agree with you. I think it's a really interesting point and something that perhaps I hadn't spent enough time thinking about. But I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head in the question that there is a correlation, but where the causality is coming from is a lot murkier. So yeah, there is a correlation between big governments and low trust societies, but what causes that is not exactly clear. And like, it probably is a loop where they both kind of, like feed into one another. And of course, the bigger the government gets, it tends to destroy the communal bonds that hold people together, that kind of force people into
civil
these
society,
communities, civil societies, churches, neighborhoods, things like this. So I agree. I think there's something to that, if you have a society where we don't have trust for one another, then it's going to be very hard to get people to not look to a strong man, like an authoritarian, to control the other side. And this is true, like you said, with an out-group enemy or an in-group enemy. But I also think that, we all kind of rationalize and make excuses for what we all already wanted to believe. This is like part of the human condition that we end up doing this. I'm sure I'm doing this in this interview to some degree. But the thing that I was thinking about there is that it's like, a lot of times when you don't want to be in a situation where you piss off the entire cathedral and now you are the villain and you don't really want to be in that situation, you can justify going along with them on the grounds of whatever, on the grounds of, well, I'm still being a good libertarian because I just think that we have this low trust society and we need more trust or something like that. So I don't want to be a flamethrower, this or that. But my only point is that it's like, why doesn't this get applied toward, should we impeach the president? Well, I mean, this is really not going to help the trust of Trump supporters in the Congress if they get their guy in there and then we're impeaching that guy, especially when it's a pretty weak case to impeach him. I mean, just to be clear, Justin Amash wanted to impeach Trump when Nancy Pelosi wasn't on board with impeaching Trump over the Mueller report. Fragget Ukraine Gate or the Capitol riot or any of that. He wanted to impeach him way before that. So how does that jive with the idea of, not fracturing trust in society?
Well, hold on. Just because he's hypocritical doesn't mean his point isn't valid.
No, I'm not saying it does. That is true. But it does make you question where we apply this and where we don't. So I agree with you. I'm not arguing that the point isn't valid. I think it's a very valid point. I just think it should be equally applied across the board. So if we're going to use this to imply anything, I think the truth, like the way I see it, is that so much of the distrust in America has been essentially manufactured in order to distract from the corruption.
Yeah.
And so the way I look at it is that the best thing we can do is focus back on the corruption, because that is the thing that has the most potential to not unite. I hate using that word unite,
I know you're
but
saying.
to at least destroy the idea that we have to be at war with each other.
You're really resolved this issue in my head with what you just said, and here's why. One of the reasons I'm an anarchist is because it seems just deranged to me that I would sit down. It's not even like you, I would maybe feel comfortable with because we're boys, but like someone I've never met and be like, this is how you should run your business. This is how you should live your life in your home. This is, and to force them to do this, it just seems absolutely insane to me. It's like, who are you and where do you get off telling this person how to live your life? And so, because I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong and I'm using force, that's really going to screw this up for not only this person, but this community, this state, this nation. And one of the concerns people are having right now, Kristen Tate just wrote a book about this, is how internal migration is changing America's political geography, because a lot of people are fleeing blue states to red states, but they're taking their blue state voting record and ideology. Mm-hmm. The blue states are like, can spare them. And then it's like turning people, blah, blah, blah. And when Amash was saying this, I asked myself, am I one of the bad guys? Is it possible that my family left the Soviet Union and I'm raised in America with a Soviet mindset, with grandparents and my parents? We spoke Russian at home. It was very much the Russian mindset. Am I just, instead of going from California to Austin and making Austin into LA, am I coming from the Soviet Union and making America a low trust Soviet country? Like, I could be one of the bad guys here. And that really threw me for a loop. And then what you just said made me feel a lot better, because there's an asymmetry. Because I think a lot of the blue-pilled left really, really despise Trump supporters. Like, they really think, if there's actually a poll, they asked, what is your number one issue? And they said Trump voters. It was more than climate change, it was more than poverty, it was more than COVID, it was Trump voters. It's not the same with Trump voters. They don't hate people who vote for Biden or for Pelosi anywhere near as bad as they hate Washington, CNN, and some other, like George Soros. So it's not a low trust in that sense, in the Soviet sense, and it's not an animosity going equally in both directions.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think to the extent that Trump voters hate Biden voters, it's usually because they hate them so much.
Yeah.
At least in my experience, it's like they're kind of just like, let us just live our lives. Like, don't stop telling me I have to brainwash my kids to believe what you believe. At least again, there's exceptions to this.
Of course.
But, there is something really interesting about the movement of people. Has always, in a lot of ways, like people voting with their feet, has always spoken louder than any government propaganda possibly can. I mean, like, you could say whatever you want to about how life is better for the average person in Mexico than the average person in America. But if you look at the trends of people moving, you just can't, no matter how much propaganda you put out there, you can't. And this is ultimately why the Berlin Wall was built, right? Because people were flooding out. And they were like, the jig is up. Like, if everybody sees that everyone wants to leave.
Do you know what the official name of the Berlin Wall was?
What?
The anti-fascist rampart. Because their argument was the fascists are trying to get into East Germany.
Right. So that's right. So they had to lie to you. But even that's exactly proving my point, that they couldn't tell you we're building this wall to keep you in.
Yeah.
Because if you know that, then it's like, well, that feels a lot more like a prison than it does like a better system, especially when the calling card of the communists was that this is a better life for the average worker. That was the whole justification for the system, was that this is what it's built around, the average working class guy, not for the well-to-do. That's the whole point of the system. And so there is something really interesting right now where you see, this is a little off topic from what you were saying, but where you see all of the propaganda from the corporate press saying like, oh my God, these red states just totally mismanaged their COVID response and they've just been such a disaster. And then at the same time, watching all of these people move to these red states in droves. And you're like, how much longer can you really keep this up? Like,
why are they moving to where there's less economic development, less business, and more COVID and death?
Like, come on. I mean, there's like, how
it's not
can
like
you
they're coming from Alabama to Florida. It's not red to red.
No.
It's New York and California, which are as blue as it gets.
Right. But I do think that that is a legitimate concern on the part of those red states.
Sure.
And you see a lot of this happening, that people move there, but they do, they don't, it's not like they really learned their lesson to reject kind of like the ideology that got their states into that position. They're just like, well, it seems nicer here, so we're going to go move here.
Because in their mind, rejecting that ideology means now I have to be a homophobe. Right. Yeah. So like, that's literally the thought process. It's like, I'm going to vote the same way because the alternative is I want gay people to be closeted and in jail. And that's not an option. So, I mean, that's literally the extent of the thought process. It never even enters their head that, so the other things. One of the things last thing I want to talk to you about is the black pill, which drives me absolutely crazy. And I just had this epiphany that it's very much presented as this logical, well-thought position, but it's an emotional state. And it can be reduced to the idea that unusual things never happen, because there's no chance that this unlikely thing will ever occur. I had to block someone on Twitter because when this Cuomo stuff was going down, they were insisting there's zero possibility he will have any consequences. And I said, it's not zero. I'm not at all saying he's going to jail, but 3 Illinois governors have gone to jail. It could be that if someone who was you and I talked about this on one of our shows last summer, that the talk at the time was, if Biden's health goes south, they're going to pull him and put Cuomo in. He was very much being discussed and presented as possibly the next presidential candidate. That's dead now. Not only has Hillary Clinton come out against him, so has the head of the New York State Senate Democratic Majority Leader, Stuart Cousins is her name. So even that is already a major consequence in terms of his political future. But what's amazing to me is knowing that any of these black pill people will still insist that nothing like this could ever happen, or when this thing happened that they assumed could never happen, well, it doesn't really matter anyway, because he didn't go to jail. And it's like, you are so committed to nothing ever changing when things change all the time. It's very, very disheartening. Do you encounter a lot of that with your audience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I don't know, not like an overwhelming amount, but for sure.
I just got to finish I'm sorry.
Sure.
I didn't block him for disagreeing with me. I blocked him because I'm like, dude, enough, go away. And he wouldn't go away. I'm like, okay, if I tell you to go away, you don't go away. We have to enforce our borders.
If you don't have borders, you don't have a Michael Malice.
That's
so
true.
I agree. So I think that it's easy for anyone who focuses on the stuff we focus on to get blackpilled. It's almost something that all of us have to fight to some degree, because when you're focusing on the worst things that states do, it's really easy to just be like, oh my God. And it's just, I like, there's a case to be blackpilled, but it's just, there's a more overwhelming case to be white pilled. And the truth is that if you it's like, if you can just kill yourself, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can just kill yourself and be done right now. Right now, this whole thing can be over. So if you're choosing not to do that, you're already taking a white pill to some degree. You're already saying, well, hey, I want to stick around because I want to see if this could be more good than bad. I want to stick around to see if maybe whatever it is, maybe I have some happiness, or there's an afterlife, or there's this, or whatever it may be. And if you are, if you're just focused on like the war in Yemen, it's easy to be like, man, this is a goddamn, it's hell on earth. And there's no end in sight. And even though Joe Biden said he wasn't going to support the Saudis, they just bombed another Houthi village the other day, and like all these kids died. It's like so horrible, But if you were talking about the prospects for the future in 1985, and you were talking about what the prospects for the future of the country were, first off, you wouldn't even know that the internet was coming.
Right.
Right? I mean, like the internet, I guess technically existed, but nothing we, you would have no idea that that's it. You'd be planning out the whole future without the internet in your mind, like this thing that just changes everything. And there might be 3 more things like that in the next 30 years that we can't even possibly predict what they'll be and what impact they'll have and how they'll change everything. And, I probably mentioned this before to you, but it's my favorite thing ever that Gene Epstein said to me. But he said it's the case for radical optimism that if you were sitting around in the year 1845 and you're like at the height of slavery, and you were like, I think in the next 20 years, slavery is going to be abolished throughout the West, that would have seemed like you're nuts.
Yeah, you would have been physically assaulted for advocating this. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
but it's not only that. It's that I'm not even necessarily being optimistic. I'm just saying, don't be defeatist. You're saying there's no possibility that things can't improve or at least stay where we are. Like, to be that certain of things being so not only are you a 10 out of 10 in terms of certainty, you're a negative 10 out of 10 in terms of direction. Like, as extreme as you and I are, or as I am at least, it's really kind of absurd to have both of these dials set to max.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's foolish to be overly optimistic or pessimistic about the future. We just have no idea. And the other thing about it is that it's a self-defeating philosophy, because the future isn't pre-written. At least I don't believe it is. I mean, perhaps it is, but in which case it doesn't make sense to be white-pilled or black-pilled, just be, because it's all going to happen either way. But the future is going to be made by what human beings do. Right. And so if you're going to have an attitude like, well, it's all going to be bad, it's like, well, then you're not going to do anything to make it better. And, if everyone had that attitude, then you're guaranteeing the future. So that's, like you might as well, like every great story, every great hero in a movie or in a novel or something like that is the guy who didn't give up and came back, against the odds. So
the comeback kid, Bill Clinton.
Yeah, right. Try to be Bill Clinton is what I'm saying. Don't take the black pill. Just be Bill Clinton.
Take the plane.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Repeatedly.
Many times, at least 13 that we know of.
Was it 13?
I don't remember. It was something like that.
Hey guys, want to talk to you about Blue Block's blue light glasses. If you're like me, God help you, you spend way too much time staring at the computer, staring at your phone, and staring at the screens, becoming blue-pilled. And that does give you headaches. It does make you feel like your energy's low. It's not normal. It's not natural. Blue Blocks helps you with that. It helps you get your energy back, helps you sleep better, and blocks out the unhealthy effects of blue light from your computer, phone, and TV. If you go to blueblocks.com, BLUBLOX.com/you're welcome, or just use code welcome at checkout, you get free shipping, you get 15% off your order, and then you don't have to have these headaches and eye strain. You can feel like yourself again. Plus, they've got a lot of different types to make you feel and look really, really cool. Just like me, but not just like me, because I'm not that cool. You know who else isn't very cool? Dave Smith. Let's get back to the show. Let's talk a bit about Cuomo.
Okay.
Because people have always insisting to me that the left never turns on its own. That's not accurate. Al Franken was accused of and was guilty of far less than Bill Clinton, far less than Andrew Cuomo. I don't think anyone would doubt, if you had the three of them, which of these is the least evil person. They would all pick Al Franken. It's not even a question. They drove him out of the Senate. I don't think he ever touched that girl. Wasn't he just taking his pictures?
Yeah, he just like this goofy, grabbed her boobs.
Maybe there was other stuff too where he was just being a lech, but certainly in terms of literal rape and killing the elderly, and also sexual harassment with all these aides, he's still going to come out head and shoulders above the other two. So just to recap, we have Hillary saying, the thing people need to appreciate is if they are saying these women should be listened to, that's as much as saying you're done. I mean, that's code in politician talk. Hillary, who was he served in Bill Clinton's cabinet. And she was obviously in New York Senate for many years. She has a lot of power in the state. She came out against him. The New York State Democratic Majority Leader came out against him. The Attorney General, Tish James, who many are thinking is going to be the next governor. She is like launching an investigation instead of sweeping it on the rug.
And the Democrats, the state Congress just passed a law to rein in his executive power,
which he said he'd sign.
Right, which he yes. Now, and the debate was between the Republicans. This was a Democrat bill. The Republicans were saying it doesn't go far enough because it doesn't rein in all of his emergency powers. And the Democrats were like, well, we're going to do this kind of for show. He can't add anything else under the emergency powers. So the debate is between who wants to rein in his powers more. Yeah. It's not like as if the Democrats are taking his back and the Republicans are against him. They're all against him. And the headlines of the articles even read as like him saying he'll sign this bill, but he won't resign. That's where the negotiating is at. It's like, I'm not going to resign quite yet. So things are bad for him.
And de Blasio, mayor of New York, also spoke out against him. There's a congressman from Queens who said that, he's a bully on the phone, threatened to destroy him, and many politicians on background. And this is the kind of thing where it's not like when you have these articles about sources in the Trump White House, it's like, this is the kind, how these people are behind closed doors. They're not accusing of anything that's even remotely implausible, that hasn't been verified on the record by people putting their name out, that this is how he operates. And of course he operates this way. He's a thug, son of this former thug governor. So my question to you is, I think there's no shot, I don't want to say no, but I think it's almost impossible that he's going to be the nominee in 2022 for the Democratic Party. Do you see him lasting that long?
The nominee for governor?
For governor.
For saying, right now, my guess would be no. I mean, this is a lot of heat coming at Cuomo. And I think that he is going to, at this point, he's now got several burdens to carry around with him. It's not just one. I mean, it's like he's got this nursing home scandal and the subsequent cover up. And now he's got the sexual the sexual harassment claims and all of this. I think, you're absolutely right that it went in the last year. He went from being the Democrats' golden boy to being their fall guy. And that's a pretty encouraging sign. So I agree with you. Probably not.
Do you know what's else is interesting is that like some of this so-called sexual harassment, like one woman, excuse me, like he put his hand on the small of her back and asked her if she's still like dating her boyfriend. And I'm like, okay, like sexual harassment's a big term, but in terms of like he shoved me against the wall and shoved this tongue down my throat, he forced me to watch him jerk off. And it's like, oh, he touched me on my back. I mean, I can see him being like, okay, I didn't think this was a big deal, especially if you're like Italian and handsy.
Yes, but of course, these are the rules that have been set up now, that there are no shades of gray. This is black and white. And the term is sexual misconduct.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Basically anything anything other than like having your hands in the air at all times you can be guilty of that. But I will say that it seems to me, I mean, I know you were talking about on one of our last conversations about what could really be going on here, like what are the possibilities, but it does not seem like one of the possibilities is that this actually all just came to light about the sexual harassment and no one had any indication of this before. And all of a sudden, just now we realize, I mean, it's amazing how much cover it is providing
for the nursing home stuff.
And for not just for the nursing home stuff, but the cover it's providing for the media for never covering the nursing home stuff. It's like, well, forget that. Now the reason he's in trouble is because of this thing. So you can't even say we're soft on him because we're so hard on him right now. And it's like the idea that you would have, that a governor would, I mean, maybe murder is too strong of a word. I mean,
okay,
look,
Mr. Amash.
Well, it's not, it's not like dropping a bomb on a village. Okay?
He's ignorant.
Yes, listen,
It's the system. It's the trees.
A lot of the people who order bombings of villages are trying to help those villages, and they really care about those villages. And I disagree.
Did you see that headline that said something to the effect of Joe Biden stops bombing when there were like women and children there? It's just like, he's basically Santa Claus.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. He's just, that's right. It's like if you had a headline about a murderer who just ran into a home and murdered 3 people, and you go, the guy doesn't murder 4th person, has moral, conscious of morality or whatever. But so yeah, a crisis of conscience. So yeah, it's just, but it's something to say that you would look, everybody who was at all not a complete hack at the time, at the moment when that order came down to admit COVID positive patients to nursing homes, was like, what the fuck are they doing? Like, right. This is insane. This is a death sentence for the people in those nursing homes. Like, this is the one thing that we knew very early on about COVID, was that if it gets into a nursing home, this is going to be a goddamn disaster. And they had so much trouble in nursing homes throughout the world keeping this thing out. And once it got in, it killed a whole lot of people. So to order them to take COVID positive patients into the nursing homes, this was just beyond insane. But to see now that get no attention, him brought on his brother's show and just given these puff piece interviews every night. But now they're outraged. Like, the idea that you got 10,000 corpses on your hands, but were outraged that you touched the small of a woman's back and asked if she was still dating her boyfriend. Like, I mean, it just sums up like moral outrage priorities in America today perfectly.
Well, it's just funny how we were just earlier talking about, hey, remember the 90s? I was there. This isn't how it happened. We remember a year ago.
Yeah.
All this nursing home stuff was known, and the press didn't want to talk about it. And everyone was looking around like, guys, this is really, really bad. If you want to talk about how bad COVID is, like forcing people who are the highest risk group to be exposed is really COVID at its worst, because this is forcing people to, and everyone's like, yeah, we don't want to talk about it. And then now it's like, well, this happened. It's like, yeah, we knew this last year. What are you pretending how it's news?
Listen, it's great for me. It's just really, really good for me and you and guys like us. And that's really what's important. You know what I mean? Is that it helps my credibility. But it's been really an amazing ride the last few years, where there are these like major stories, not even like the stories of our lifetime, where like, look, Donald Trump being framed for colluding with the Russians. Yeah. And I'm sitting here on my show, like, for a year and a half going, this is all a deep state attempted coup, and it's going to fall apart because they have no evidence for this shit, and this is all going to come out and they're all going to be proven wrong and blah, 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 and like all this. And then to see it all fall apart, it all be proven like wrong. And now, of course, all the right wingers come out and they're all like, it was a deep state attempted coup, blah, blah, blah. Like, but I'm like, yeah, but I've been saying this on my show for a year before any of you motherfuckers have. And to see now all these people in the mainstream coming out and going, when you look at the charts, there's really no difference between the lockdown states and the states that didn't lock down. And you're like, yep. It's like, but the idea that they pretend that there was no way to know this a year ago, or I guess at this point, 8 months ago or something like that. There was no way to know. Yeah, no, there was. And it's just people that are outside of your circles where you're not allowed to deviate from the established opinions. All of them could see this. And so it is very good for all of our credibility that we're just time and time again right on all of these issues, and the corporate press is wrong on them. And like the really big important, not that we don't get anything wrong, but the really big important issues, they're getting all of them wrong.
Let's talk about one more thing. The big 3 governors who were being lauded as the second coming last year were Cuomo, Governor Newsom of California, and Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. They were the ones who was front and center, being praised, being discussed as leaders, and so on and so forth. Newsom is facing very real a possibility of a recall, and he's not having a lot of support from the Democratic Party in his state. Whitmer so far has been unscathed, but I just do want to point out to somebody, and I'm kind of it's unfortunate it's coming off of what you just said, because this is not a case where I want to be like, I told you so. This is a case where I'm like, this is something that's really, really evil that I think is going to hopefully will blow up. There was that video that I'm sure a lot of people saw of this kid who was just beating up old people in the nursing home and filming it and laughing about it. One of these old men, and just for no reason, just beating the crap out of them. And Trump had retweeted at the time. He's like, how is this happening in America? One of those old men that he was beating up for no reason in the middle of the night died. And the kid was arrested and so on and so forth. My understanding, and I'm like 99% sure this is true, but I just want to hedge because it seems so crazy that I want to assume I'm getting something wrong rather than this is what it looks like. She forced these rando kids who had mental problems or whatever, or had crime problems, into nursing homes for some dubious reason. So if it wasn't for, if it wasn't for her, that kid wouldn't have been in nursing. It wasn't like he was an orderly. He was there to just, I don't know what the circumstances were.
Ooh, see, I didn't even know about that. That is
so. Double check me. Horrific. I could be talking out of my ass, but I don't think I am. So wow, that's the thing, because everyone kept pointing out how like, no, he was being forced to be there, so on and so forth.
So just throwing thugs into nursing homes is like, well, can I say on a lighter note, one delightful little piece of hypocrisy that's just so great. So with Governor Newsom in California, so for the recall, they have to get like signatures, and they have to get over 1 million signatures or something like that. So one of the defenses from the Newsom administration was to try to force them. I believe they failed at this bid, but they said that at-home mail-in signatures were risky for fraud.
No, they didn't.
So they had to come in and sign their signatures like in a government building. I think they weren't able to get that passed, but it was something they attempted to avoid this recall. So they just have no qualms about, after all this stuff with the election, going like, well, you can't just let people mail in their signatures. I mean, there's no one's verifying these signatures. I mean,
it's a recall. This is an important election.
This is a very important election. You can't just have people mail in their vote for a recall. Are you crazy? I mean, there could be widespread fraud.
What are we in the third world?
Yeah, like, so so much of it. It's like too funny to believe it's real.
We're running out of time. What has been my favorite part of this episode?
Your favorite part of this episode was when I made that really great point that made you totally rethink everything and be okay with being a Russian coming over here to subvert our American democracy.
You are correct.